You're hearing the sound of the prize-winning Virginia cider of Albemarle Ciderworks. Welcome back to Founding Footprints, a podcast sponsored by the Virginia 250 Commission in partnership with the Charlottesville Albemarle Convention and Visitors Bureau, the CACVB. The CACVB has developed thematic itineraries to pair with each episode. See what they've developed for this week's episode at visitcharlottesville.org. I'm Ben Bernard, historian at the University of Virginia. I had a chance to visit the cidery and then to sit down in the studio with Charlotte Shelton of Albemarle Ciderworks to talk about her work there, as well as the history of cider.
I'm Charlotte Shelton. With my family, we bought a small farm at North Garden, Virginia, where we live presently. We moved to Charlottesville in the 60s for my father's career. He was with the Department of Forestry and sold the family farm in Amherst at that time. My parents planned, and ours along with them, to get some more land when they retired, which we did in North Garden. We started planting apple trees as a hobby. It rather got out of hand. And we ended up with about 250 varieties of apple trees. So many of the apples, even currently available, it's improved a little bit in the last couple decades, were simply bland and sweet. Red Delicious, Fuji, Golden Delicious. The only exception was Granny Smith. That came out of Australia, not this country. But there are literally thousands of varieties of apples that were grown in Americas from the time of settlement. There's only one or two native apples, and they are virtually inedible crabs that even the Indians didn't use except drying them and grinding them up in some sort of powder, I understand. But the apple that we know today, Malus domestica, came from Kazakhstan, the stan's north of China, came across the trade routes. They are temperate zone fruits. They don't come true from seeds. So to propagate an apple tree, you need to graft it onto a rootstock.
It's like a clone.
The apple genome is hugely complex. You can plant a gazillion different seeds and you'll get a gazillion different apples. If you want an apple that's just like the one you're eating, you have to graft it. And to that end, when we were trying to decide what we were going to do with these couple hundred varieties of apples.
And I'm sorry, when was this?
We bought the farm in '86 with and for our parents as they retired. They have gone on now. They died in their 90s, not that long ago.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I have 3 brothers, and so 2 of them and I live on the farm now. The real hero of this is my brother Chuck, who's the sibling next to me. He's the ciderist, and he's done a marvelous job. Our ciders have won gold medals from here to Frankfurt, Germany.
So I heard that there was a gold medal recently for the rosé cider.
That was in Frankfurt, Germany. I said, Chuck, why do you want to do that? Well, he just did. And it turns out that his Brut d'Albemarle orchard blush, the French don't like us to use the word champagne, and we don't, but it's méthode traditionnelle. But all apples won the first prize for the sparkling cider category. They award up to 120 points, and that one won 119 out of 120. He entered 2 others, a Harrison Brut. Harrison is an apple variety, and then one of our regular ciders called Crab Medley, and they won golds as well.
That's wonderful.
We've also won the Governor's Cup a couple of times, and we regularly place in that competition. But that's him. That's not me. I'm just proud of him.
I'd love to hear a little bit about your background in history.
Well, as I mentioned to you before, I came along considerably before you did, and education was something that was assumed in my family. Careers for girls, I was taught, are a very good thing to have to fall back on. This sounds positively antediluvian this day and age, but nonetheless, there are a lot of us still around who grew up in that.
Right.
Nursing and teaching were the suitable careers for ladies. As I went through school, I decided, I think I'd rather teach college. Now, that necessitated going to graduate school. So I came to the University
Of Virginia.
Of Virginia, yes. All my degrees are from UVA. I graduated in 1968.
I'd love to ask you about how your history, education, and teaching has caused you to think about cider. Or what can you tell us about the history of cider itself?
I taught at Virginia Tech for 5 years, changed careers, and spent 40 years in the finance industry. As I retired and we bought this property in North Garden, I've always been interested in gardens. In fact, that's a passion of mine right now. We had a good family friend named Tom Burford. Tom had a very varied career, but he and his brother were orchardists in Amherst County. Our farm was in Amherst County. He was a family connection, actually. Tom had collected apple trees and was active in trying to preserve some of these older varieties. As late as 1900, the estimates are that there were 7,000, and some people say 9,000, and some say 19. As I mentioned, apples are not native to America. They were brought with the first settlers who came from Kent, England, to Jamestown. They brought with them seeds. Now, apples don't come true from seeds. Every apple seed does produce a tree. In fact, one of the first things we did was start a small nursery, and Tom taught us to graft. We offer a grafting workshop in the spring once a year for people who want to do it. It's one of those crafts that has just disappeared. Everybody buys their apples at the grocery store now. Most people do. And if you want to grow your own, how do you get this apple that you really wanted? It's a very small field, but we get calls when people say, my grandparents or somebody had this tree. We don't know what it is, but we want to keep it going, and so we get interest that way. We selected this 250 varieties of apples I mentioned for flavor. Now, one of the reasons they were grown, that what you had to eat is what you grew, and before refrigeration and a number of other things, how do you preserve food? You dry it, cure it. So one of the nice things about apples is that some of them keep for a very long time. They're kind of a prepackaged snack food, if you want. More than that, they ripen over a long period. The apples will start ripening in June. There are some that are not ready until November in this climate. And generally speaking, later ripening apples are the longest keeping ones. So if you were growing your own food, you wanted a variety of apples. You wanted some that you could have in the summer. I remember my grandmother. There was one apple tree that grew up by the tool shed down on the farm that I grew up on, and she started looking at it sometime about this time of year, and it had these little green apples. And I remember her going out as soon as they started falling, picking them up in their apron and coming in and peeling them. They weren't that big, and frying them. Now, to this day, I don't think there's a better meal than fried pork chops or fried country ham, biscuits, and fried apples.
Oh, wow. I don't think I've ever had a fried apple.
Well, darling, you're just culturally deprived.
I am. That's why we do this podcast. I was going to ask you, Charlotte, if you have a favorite type of apple.
Well, the classic answer is the one I just ate. I would say, and this is not original, that maybe the best apple in terms of variety, when it is well grown, and that is a huge caveat, is the Albemarle Pippin. It is absolutely wonderful. But I hesitate to say that because then everybody wants the Albemarle Pippin, and they are hell to grow.
What distinguishes them?
Flavor and their late ripening. It was our first food export, actually. Franklin had them brought over to England when he was a colonial.
Benjamin Franklin.
Benjamin Franklin, yeah. They are a late ripening apple. The English growing season was too short for them. It's a legendary apple in this part of the world, but it originated, ironically enough, on what's now Long Island, New York, where it's called the Newtown apple. Little village of Newtown, on a farm there, grew up on the edge of a swamp, I'm told. I wasn't there, about 1700. And it was noted for being late ripening, long keeping, and wonderful flavor. It's winey, rich, sweet and tart at the same time. That's what makes an apple really wonderful. In the 1700s, Colonel Thomas Walker was with Washington and Brandywine, and he brought some signwood. Signwood is the little pieces of wood that you could graft it. He had married a Meriwether lady. Castle Hills was her property, and that's where he was. And she had a daughter who had a farm in North Garden. And I read about this in a book and thought, aha, North Garden, Albemarle Pippin. Well, we planted them and we planted them. They do all sorts of things. So it's a challenge to grow them.
But it has these historic roots.
It doesn't lend itself to commercial growing. If you want to grow apples for a living, you don't do what we did. You need to have enough for a market. And so, I would say, oh, yeah, I want that one. And I get one or two trees and you plant them in, and so they're scattered all over the hillside. So people say, oh, isn't it beautiful out there? But our apples bloom over a 6-week period, and so we don't have any mass. And this year, of course, we got zapped by that freeze. We had a relatively warm early February, March, and then in March, we had that down to 20 degrees one night, and right when the buds were swelling in blooms, and so that did us in. We have a few apples, but not as much this year. But that's agriculture for you.
I wanted to ask you, if I may, about the importance of cider before the industrial era in the 17th and 18th century. So before modern technologies to purify water, alcohol was so important as a source of water. Does cider fit into that?
Oh, definitely. But what you're describing was more typical of more settled areas, namely England.
In cities and things?
Yeah, I was in York a few years ago, and they had all those shops along the street and the houses over there. And what they would do is flush the offal into the streets and then hose it down into the river, and that would have been a real problem. Now, when they got to this country, most of the water was pretty pure, although they managed to settle in a swamp, which is where Jamestown is, and that didn't help very much. But fermentation kills nasty little things like E. coli. So what you're talking about is quite true. Cider is what everyone in America drank into the middle of the 19th century. It was what everybody had because these seedling apple orchards were planted almost from the get-go. And they were planted because even though most of the apples didn't taste that great, every apple produces juice that has sugar that ferments into a palatable beverage. In fact, some of the best cider apples are not something you'd want to eat for dessert. If you wanted to have a decent lifestyle, you wanted to plant some early ripening apples like my grandma's fried apples in the early summer. You wanted apples like a maiden blush that ripened in August when it was hot so you could dry them. She would spread them out on the roof of the chicken house, I remember, and climb up every night to gather them up so that they didn't gather dew and lay them out the next morning. That's how you dried things. Traditionally, the best cider casks were tapped 4th of July.
That's amazing. And maybe the best ones to come on the 250th anniversary of 1776 next year, July 4th, 2026.
We've done particularly well with our Brut, Méthode Traditionnelle,
Right.
Champagne-style ciders. And so having a 1776 Brut is something that we're thinking about.
What a terrific idea for the upcoming anniversary. I want to ask you two historic questions. When I was in college, I took a seminar with a social historian of early modern England called Keith Wrightson, and we did a week on, marriage in 17th century England and gin, and he told us a story of his colleague who had found a recipe, a historic recipe for making cider, and that he thought to himself, this recipe can't be right, because we have accounts of laborers in the fields in England, and they have a bowl of cider with breakfast and a bowl with lunch. And, it's not possible that this recipe is accurate because they would have been drunk all day long. And he recreated the recipe, and it turns out they were drunk all day long. Is pre-modern cider as alcoholic as it is today? Is the story true? I've also read the opposite, that pre-modern cider is actually less alcoholic than we think of today.
Well, I don't know how we're going to go back and test it, to be perfectly honest with you, but it varies. Our apples ferment out to between 7 and 10%. Part of that's climate. Generally speaking, apples in New England are going to be a little slightly lower. And of course, most of the people write laws and never tasted cider. I don't think cider was supposed to be under 7.5%. Well, that didn't help us much. We did get it through the Virginia legislature, and 10% is. And your intern just asked me, what happens if it goes more? And I say, well, we just pay more taxes on it. Keep in mind that all wine is cider made from grapes.
That's right.
When you get that in your head, you understand what cider really is and ought to be. Our ciders are dry, crisp, proper ciders. They're not the sweet, frothy alcopop stuff that floods the grocery stores. They are food friendly, and food enhances these ciders. So pork dishes, cream sauce dishes, think Normandy, known for its cows and its cider. Wonderful with cheeses. Cider is virtually unknown in our society, and people who think they know it, they're thinking about the variety I just referred to in pejorative terms. Cider, properly speaking, is fermented apple juice, and that's what ours is. There's nothing in it except for the yeast that enhances the fermentation, but apples.
We had a chance to visit the Albemarle Ciderworks. I remember thinking, well, you can buy a bottled cider in the supermarket at the bar on tap, and it tastes the same, right? It's homogenized for a particular brand across the country. But if you make cider with the same kind of attention that winemakers make, it's a very different type of product.
Part of that commonality comes from flavoring and so forth. If you look on the bottle as to what's in it, a lot of it's water. That's how you get, 3 and 4% cider. You water it back.
So speaking of American history and cider, I have to ask you about Johnny Appleseed, this American mythic figure. He's not planting apple trees to eat then. He's a kind of alcohol purveyor.
John Chapman, his real name, and his brother The legend paints him as some sort of crank, walking barefoot through the snow with a pot on his head
with
and
seeds,
sleeping with,
right?
yeah. And he was planning seedling nurseries just ahead of the line of settlement to sell whips, which is a proper name for young apple tree, to settlers. Because Congress, in trying to get the West settled, provided that if you took up a section of land, you could do that, but you had to demonstrate serious agricultural intent so that the average person could take up land. This is going out through the Ohio Valley and all through that. So what would demonstrate more serious agricultural intent than planting an orchard that was going to take 8, 10, 12 years to come into production? So that was his business plan, and he actually died relatively well off. I'm not saying he was a millionaire or something. So the legend was long after he died and came out of a New York newspaper somewhere. So it's just kind of interesting. If you read Michael Pollan's Botany of Desire, what does he talk about? Those 4 things: apples, potatoes, marijuana, and something else. I forget. But his section on apples goes into that.
I love the care and attention that you give to understanding apples and the industry, and we could tell from visiting the cidery how much care and attention goes into your product. So thank you so much for sharing your craft with us and with our listeners.
Well, thank you for asking. And come see us. We can expand on this.
Absolutely.
Founding Footprints is a VA 250 project. America, made in Virginia. This podcast is a production of the Virginia Audio Collective at WTJU 91.1 FM, hosted by Dr. Benjamin Bernard with sound design by Sage Tanguay, editing by Ella Powell, and music provided by Blue Dot Sessions. If you'd like to explore the history of Charlottesville and Albemarle County, you can find more information at visitcharlottesville.org. Virginia is for history lovers.